Hi, welcome to Living Equations. I'm Soumya Shantamandal and I work at the intersection of architecture, urban planning, and business. Today we shall take a look at the age-old debate, buying versus renting. Growing up, I always assumed that buying a home is just what people do. You study, get a job, and save some money and at some point you buy a house. My parents bought their first home when I was still in school. I still remember the conversations clearly. There were conversations in our house around developers, about home loans, about budgets, locations, also about the proximity to our school. At that age, I wasn't thinking about property markets or personal finance. I just knew that this was a big decision for our family. Years later, after watching friends, colleagues, and relatives go through similar decisions, I've noticed something. The buying versus renting debate usually starts in the wrong place. It quickly becomes a discussion about rent versus EMI, returns, appreciation. We have all been part of such discussions. But that's not how the decision actually feels in real life. The real reason this debate never ends is simple. Different people are solving different problems. For example, take two people. One is settled in a city, has children in school, and expects life to remain broadly similar for the next several years. The other is still building a career and is open to moving cities if a good opportunity comes up. Now, if they make different choices, it doesn't mean that one is right and the other is wrong. It simply means that the situations are different. So instead of looking for one answer that works for everyone, let's look at what works for you. Let's start with buying. The obvious benefit is ownership. It's your home. You can change it, improve it, and live in it your way. But more importantly, buying gives you stability and removes a set of recurring questions. Will rent increase next year down the line? Will we need to move again if the landlord asks us to vacate? Can we stay here long enough for the children to finish school? These may seem very small individually, but over time, these decisions add up. Buying also comes with its own questions. Will the family outgrow this house? What happens if we need to relocate for work? For people with a long-term horizon in one place, these questions are usually easier to plan around. Now let's look at renting. Renting is often treated as a temporary option, but that's not always true. Renting gives you flexibility, changing jobs becomes easier, moving cities becomes easier, trying different neighborhoods also become easier. I have stayed on rent across several houses in 4 different cities, so understand both the flexibility it gives you as well as the challenges it brings. Now let's talk about the financial side because that is where most comparisons go wrong. In many Indian cities today, the gap between rent and EMI is not so small. When my wife and I were evaluating our own home purchase, this was exactly the conversation we had. We were not looking at only EMI. We were comparing it directly with the rent in the same area. In some cases, rent was significantly lower. In others, the gap was smaller but still meaningful. If the EMI is much higher than the rent, then every month you are committing more money by buying. That is a long-term commitment. The money not going into a house when you rent can be saved, invested, or kept as a financial buffer. Over time, that difference compounds. But here is the most honest question. What will you actually do with that difference? Will you be buying the next iPhone, or will you go on a vacation, or will you upgrade your car? Because most people don't invest it, it gets absorbed into daily life. So the comparison only works if you are genuinely disciplined with the money you save by renting. Now most comparisons stop at rent versus EMI. But ownership also involves much more than EMI. There is the down payment, registration, stamp duty, maintenance, repairs, the huge chunk of money that goes into interiors, as well as recurring property taxes. And there is also money tied up to the house itself. Think about a rupees 20 lakh down payment. If you had invested that amount at an 8% annual return, it would grow to roughly rupees 43 lakhs over 10 years. Once that money goes into a house, you give up those returns. This is called opportunity cost, the returns you give up from other uses of that money. On the other side, renters often assume that rent stays stable over time. But cities do not work like that. Average rental inflation across major metros in 2025 has been roughly 7 to 9% year on year. In certain high demand pockets, increases have been even higher, between 15 to 25%. Now, if you are a tenant, these numbers may not surprise you. Many of us have already felt this in real life. Rents increasing at a rate that outpaces annual income growth. There is also another source of confusion that is worth naming clearly. We often make two different decisions. Where do I want to live and where do I want to invest? Sometimes both match, sometimes they do not. A home can be a good place to live without being a great investment. On the other hand, an investment can perform well without being somewhere you want to live. Keeping these two decisions separate makes the thinking much clearer. So how should you think about buying versus renting? It helps to take a look at these four things. First, how long will you stay in the same city or area? If it is long term, buying becomes much more practical. Second, can you afford all the costs of ownership? Not just the EMI and the down payment, but registration, maintenance, interiors, repairs, and the recurring taxes. Think about the number in totality. Third, are you buying to live or are you buying to invest? These are not always the same goal, though sometimes one property can serve both. Fourth, how important is flexibility for you? Over the next 5 years, say a job change, a growing family, or a shift in life direction can matter much more than any financial calculation. So when you look at these four together, the answer usually becomes clearer. When I think back to my parents buying their first home when I was in school, what stands out is not returns or appreciation. It is how practical the decision worked. It had to work for a family. It also had to work financially. That was the focus. Maybe that is what gets lost today. Because a housing decision is not only about a house. It is about your work, your family, your money, and the direction your life is heading. That is why there is no single right answer, only the answer that fits your situation. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, do consider subscribing to Living Equations.